They always say that the most devastating storms in your life don't come with dark, heavy clouds or a loud roar of thunder. They don't give you a warning so you can run inside, lock your doors, and protect the things you spent your entire life building. No, the most dangerous storms arrive on a beautiful, perfectly sunny day, wearing a warm smile and speaking with a voice that sounds exactly like absolute love. They sit right across from you at the kitchen table every single morning, pouring your coffee, asking about your day, and kissing your forehead before you go to sleep. They look you straight in the eyes with absolute tenderness while their hands are secretly digging into the dark soil of your life, searching for the exact roots to cut so they can watch your whole world completely collapse. My name is Clara. For over 10 years, I truly believed I was one of the most blessed women alive. I lived in a beautiful, quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in the American suburbs, where the lawns were always perfectly green and the houses looked like postcards of peace. I was a professional graphic designer and digital brand architect. I had built a very successful boutique creative agency completely from scratch, working from a spacious home office. Because I spent my entire 20s working exhausting 14-hour days, missing personal vacations, and sacrificing my youth, my small business was thriving. I was highly disciplined with my money. Every single month, without fail, I transferred a massive portion of my independent corporate revenue directly into my private 401k retirement account. That 401k was my ultimate security anchor. It was my protection for the future, the absolute proof of a decade of hard work, missed sleep, and total professional dedication. By the time I turned 35, that account held a staggering $380,000 of pure untouched capital. It was my financial fortress, and I guarded it with total care, or at least I thought I did. My husband, Julian, was a mid-level commercial real estate broker. He was a man who possessed a natural, effortless magnetism that made people instantly trust him. He had bright, expressive eyes, a sharp, handsome face, and a smooth, confident way of talking that could convince a stone to move. But underneath that polished, charming exterior lay a deeply unstable, hyper-ambitious ego. Julian didn't just want to be successful. He was completely obsessed with projecting an image of extreme luxury and elite social standing to the world. He wanted the multi-million-dollar developer deals, the luxury sports cars, and the respect of high society billionaires. Unfortunately, his actual commercial real estate commissions were incredibly unpredictable. Some months he would make a decent sale, but many months he would bring home absolutely nothing, his pipeline completely drying up for half a year at a time. Because I loved him with my entire soul and wanted our home to be a completely stress-free sanctuary, I quietly took over 90% of our primary living expenses. I paid our heavy monthly mortgage, bought the high-end groceries, covered our premium healthcare plans, and handled every single utility bill without a single moment of resentment or complaint. "You are my absolute rock, Clara," Julian would whisper softly into my hair, wrapping his warm arms tightly around my shoulders as I sat at my design desk late on a Friday night, rubbing my burning eyes. "I know my commercial listings are highly volatile right now, but I am running myself into the ground completely to bring a massive multi-million-dollar portfolio across the finish line for us. I promise you, one day, very soon, I am going to buy you a literal castle, and you will never have to stress about a client deadline ever again." I would look up into his handsome face, my heart completely overflowing with love and profound gratitude. I didn't care about a castle. I didn't care about luxury sports cars or projecting a false image of immense wealth to the neighborhood. All I cared about was the beautiful, unbreakable bond of our marriage. Because I trusted him implicitly as my lifetime teammate, I never kept my massive private 401k a dark secret from him. My financial portals and digital ledgers were open on our secure home network. I truly believed that a marriage built on absolute transparency was the only kind of marriage worth having. I had no idea that my beautiful openness was actually providing a master manipulator with the exact map he needed to completely execute my financial ruin. The first subtle, chilling shift in our home life began about 8 months ago. Julian's behavior suddenly underwent a strange, aggressive transformation. The man who used to come home early to help me prepare dinner was suddenly staying out until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He claimed that the high-end commercial property market was going through an incredibly tense, hyper-competitive seasonal shift in the city. If I am not out networking with these elite luxury developers at midnight, Clara, the junior agents will completely steal my listings, he snapped defensively one evening when I gently asked why his phone was constantly ringing at midnight. I am exhausting myself entirely just to bring a major deal across the finish line for us. I don't need you acting like a suspicious prison guard the second I walk through the door. His harsh words felt like a physical blow to my chest. He had never spoken to me with such sharp, bitter condescension before. I felt an immediate, painful wave of personal guilt, telling myself that his high-stress corporate sales environment was simply taking a brutal toll on his mental health. I doubled my efforts to make our home as quiet, supportive, and perfectly peaceful as possible. I stopped asking questions about his late-night meetings, forced myself to ignore the cold, distant look in his eyes, and quietly managed our entire life on my own. But a woman's intuition is a powerful, unshakable force that refuses to be silenced by polite lies. It is a quiet, persistent whisper at the very back of your mind that tells you something is deeply, dangerously wrong long before your eyes can see the evidence. It was the way he suddenly started taking his smartphone into the bathroom with him, locking the door securely behind him even just to wash his hands. It was the way his face would instantly freeze into a tense, rigid mask if I walked into the living room while he was typing an email. I began to notice that he was suddenly spending massive amounts of money on luxury items that made absolutely no sense for a struggling real estate agent. He bought custom-tailored designer suits, an incredibly expensive gold watch, and premium Italian leather shoes, claiming they were absolutely mandatory to project an image of extreme success to his wealthy commercial clients. In high-end real estate, people don't buy from a man who looks average, Clara, he scoffed arrogantly when I pointed out the thousands of dollars piling up on our credit card statements. You have to spend money to make money. Just stay out of my professional business and let me handle my strategy. My big deal is closing next month, and it will cover everything. I wanted so desperately to believe him. I wanted to protect the beautiful memory of the gentle, loving man I had married 9 years ago. But the universe has a very specific, absolute way of shattering a beautiful facade when the weight of the deception becomes too heavy for the foundation to hold. It was a quiet, rainy Tuesday afternoon. Julian had left the house early, claiming he had an all-day luxury property showcase in a wealthy coastal city 2 hours away. I was working diligently at my desk, designing a complex branding framework for a major corporate client, when my smartphone suddenly vibrated on the desk beside my keyboard. It was an automated security text notification from my primary private wealth bank. My eyes casually skimmed the screen, expecting to see a routine quarterly statement update or a standard system maintenance reminder. But as my brain fully processed the stark black and white characters printed on that small digital display, the blood completely froze solid in my veins. Security alert. Your request for an immediate total structural modification and password reset on 401k account ending in 4409 has been successfully processed. The primary recovery email has been changed to jvance.properties@email.com. A sharp, icy spike of pure adrenaline shot straight through my nervous system. That account 4409, was my private 401k retirement fund. The account holding my $380,000, and the recovery email listed in the notification was Julian's private business address. With hands that were suddenly trembling so violently I could barely track the cursor, I opened a secure private browser window and tried to log into my financial portal. Access denied, invalid credentials, please contact account administration. A heavy, suffocating weight crushed down on my chest, making it completely impossible to breathe. I pulled out my phone and dialed the bank's emergency compliance hotline, my heart hammering like a trapped bird against my ribs. After a grueling 10 minutes of identity verification and security clearance questions, the voice of the senior compliance teller came back through the line, sounding deeply sympathetic but incredibly clinical. I am looking at the historical transaction logs for your wealth account, Ms. Clara, the teller said softly. A manual, high-level ownership transfer request was submitted digitally 4 days ago, utilizing your verified personal biometric access tokens and explicit electronic signature. The account has been officially converted into a joint asset trust, and a total wire transfer was initiated yesterday morning. A wire transfer? My voice was nothing more than a broken, terrified whisper. For how much? The entire balance, ma'am, the teller replied coldly. $380,000 has been successfully wired out to an institutional escrow fund at Apex Luxury Development Group. The transaction is fully completed. The current balance of your wealth account is 0. I slowly dropped the phone onto my desk, the room around me spinning into absolute terrifying darkness. $380,000. My entire life's work, my security, my decade of sacrifice, had been completely and entirely stolen from me. The man I loved, the man I had supported, the man who had promised to protect me, had walked into my digital vault, stripped it completely down to the bare copper wires, and left me standing in the smoking ruins of my own generosity. As I sat there in the silence of my office, a dark, freezing transformation took place inside my soul. The blinding tears of shock and agonizing heartbreak completely dried on my cheeks. The desperate, wounded wife died in that exact moment, and a cold, hyper-focused, and incredibly dangerous adversary took her place. Julian believed he was a smooth operator who had successfully executed a brilliant, untouchable heist against a naive graphic designer. But he had completely forgotten that a woman who builds corporate brands for a living knows exactly how to trace an identity, expose a fraud, and dismantle a structure down to its very first lie. To completely destroy an arrogant predator, you must never strike back immediately in a blind, chaotic rage. If I confronted Julian the exact second he walked through the front door that evening, he would simply deploy his highly practiced manipulative charm. He would make up a beautiful, dramatic lie about a temporary investment emergency, twist the truth to make me feel completely unstable, and immediately shift the stolen funds into an unreachable offshore account before I could take legal action. I needed a strategy that was perfectly silent, intensely calculated, and utterly devastating. I needed to let him believe he had won completely, while I quietly constructed an absolute cage around his entire future. I spent the next 48 hours acting with the cold, detached precision of a corporate spy. When Julian returned home from his property showcase late that night, flashing his confident, bright smile and complaining about the exhausting coastal traffic, my face was a perfect, unreadable mask of a quiet, trusting wife. "Did you have a successful day with the luxury developers, honey?" I asked smoothly, my voice completely normal as I handed him a warm plate of dinner. "It was absolutely phenomenal, Clara," he boasted arrogantly, sitting down at the kitchen counter and adjusting his gold watch with an air of immense superiority. "The deal is moving faster than I ever anticipated. I am putting together a massive, elite commercial portfolio that is going to completely change our social standing in this city. Just trust your husband. I am building a real empire for us." I looked at his handsome face, the face of the sociopath who had left my personal bank account completely empty just 24 hours prior, and felt a deep, twisting sense of pure physical revulsion. He wasn't just a thief. He was a psychological monster who could look his own wife directly in the eye without a single flicker of human guilt or hesitation. "I've always trusted your vision, Julian," I said softly, forcing a gentle, supportive smile to my lips. "I am sure you will get exactly what you deserve very soon." The exact moment he drifted off into a deep, heavy sleep that night, snoring peacefully beside me in the bed we had shared for 9 years, I quietly slid out from under the blankets. I crept down the dark hallway into my home office, locking the door securely behind me. I pulled out a professional data recovery drive from my design studio toolkit, a tool I frequently use to retrieve corrupted, encrypted client databases, and plugged it directly into Julian's personal business laptop, which he had left charging on his desk. Within 1 hour, my creative terminal had fully cloned his entire hard drive, mirroring his complete email history, his private messaging applications, his cloud storage archives, and his hidden financial ledgers straight into my secure corporate network. As the data populated my dual monitors over the next several hours, The true, sickening reality of Julian's life completely unspooled before my eyes. The $380,000 had not been lost in a bad market transaction. It had been wired straight into a high-end commercial property, closing escrow to purchase a spectacular, hyper-modern luxury glass penthouse overlooking the downtown marina. But my name was absolutely nowhere to be found on the pending property deed. The sole owner listed on the luxury real estate contract was Julian Vance, alongside a co-signatory named Evelyn Rose. Evelyn Rose was a 24-year-old high-fashion luxury model and aspiring boutique owner. She was also Julian's secret mistress. The email logs and private text messages between them detailed a torrid, wildly materialistic affair that had been actively going on for over 14 months. As I scrolled through page after page of their private conversations, the absolute scale of Julian's malice became crystal clear. Julian was completely consumed by a desperate, narcissistic need to project an image of immense wealth, extreme luxury, and elite status, a lifestyle that our stable, quiet, and practical suburban home simply could not provide for his massive ego. Evelyn was his high-priced enabler, but she demanded a constant stream of luxury designer handbags, first-class international vacations, and elite country club access. To fund this double life of astounding opulence, Julian had piled up a mountain of secret credit card debt, taken out massive personal loans, and was on the absolute verge of total financial collapse and public exposure. He had reached a critical breaking point 2 months ago when Evelyn gave him an ultimatum. I found a private text message thread from Evelyn dated April 2nd. "I'm completely done hiding in this cheap rental apartment, Julian. If you don't secure that modern glass penthouse overlooking the marina by this summer, I am walking away from this relationship completely. I don't date mid-level sales agents who just talk about being rich. Prove it." Julian's response was immediate, cold, and utterly sickening. "Do not worry, my beautiful queen. I have full access to my wife's private wealth account. She has over $380,000 of pure, untouched 401k savings sitting there like an absolute goldmine. She's just a quiet designer. She never checks her financial portals during her busy creative seasons. I am going to execute an ownership transfer trick using her phone while she's asleep. The moment the cash clears the escrow fund in June, the penthouse is ours. We will board our flight to Paris before she even realizes her savings are completely gone down to zero." I sat in the dark office, the cold green light of the monitors illuminating the icy resolve forming in my eyes. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was actively planning to completely abandon me. He was going to wait until his real estate firm's high-profile elite producers Diamond Gala on June 19th announce his purchase of the magnificent luxury penthouse to all his wealthy corporate colleagues, pack his designer bags, and vanish to Europe with Evelyn the very next morning, leaving me with a drained account, a heavy mortgage, and a completely shattered life. But as I continued to dig deeper into his cloned corporate files, my eyes locked onto a catastrophic, arrogant error that Julian had made in his desperate rush to secure the property. To expedite the luxury penthouse closing without triggering a standard, mandatory public compliance check that would alert my design studio networks, Julian had committed massive corporate fraud against his own employer. He had manually hijacked the digital signature and secure corporate seal of his managing partner and CEO, a ruthless, old-school real estate billionaire named Arthur Pendleton. Julian had forged Arthur Pendleton's signature on a specialized institutional guarantee waiver, falsely stating that his real estate firm verified the absolute legitimacy of the funds and guaranteed that the asset was completely free of any competing marital fraud claims. He had also utilized his firm's official commercial escrow account to route the incoming stolen cash, completely mixing criminal funds straight into his company's official, regulated revenue streams. He had set it up perfectly to save his own skin, completely believing that if the fraud was ever discovered after he fled to Europe, his own real estate firm would be legally liable for the multi-million-dollar compliance default, effectively destroying Arthur Pendleton's massive empire while Julian lived like a king in Paris. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, slow breath. The sheer level of cold, calculated malice required to plan this was almost entirely beyond human comprehension. He was completely willing to destroy his wife of 9 years and his own iconic boss just to buy a glass mansion in the sky for a woman who loved him solely for his stolen money. I stood up, walking to the office window, looking out at the dark, peaceful suburban street. The heartbreak in my soul was completely gone, replaced by a freezing, absolute clarity. Julian believed he was a master of the real estate game. He believed that because he knew how to manipulate contracts and forge signatures, he was completely untouchable. But he had completely forgotten who he was dealing with. I built brands, I created systems, and I knew exactly how to dismantle a target from the inside out. "You want to play with my life savings, Julian?" I whispered into the cold glass of the window, a dark, dangerous smile slowly forming on my lips. "I am going to let you walk right up to the stage, and then I am going to pull the floor completely out from under your feet." A traditional legal battle is loud, exceptionally expensive, and incredibly slow. If I immediately filed a standard marital fraud lawsuit against Julian, his real estate firm's high-priced corporate defense lawyers would instantly tie our home equity and remaining assets up in family court injunctions for years. He would hide his offshore accounts, liquidate his smaller assets, and drag the process out until my personal financial resources were completely exhausted. I didn't have years, and I refused to spend a single dollar on slow legal theater. I needed a strategy that was silent, absolute, and utterly devastating. A strategy that would ensure Julian could not run, could not hide, and could not save a single penny of his stolen fortune. I initiated my counter-operation, codenamed Project Foundation. My first priority was to go directly to the top of the food chain. I didn't go to the police, and I didn't go to a family lawyer. Instead, I used my professional branding network to secure a highly confidential, private face-to-face meeting with Arthur Pendleton himself, the billionaire CEO of Pendleton Real Estate International. We met in a dim, secluded corner of an exclusive downtown business club. Arthur Pendleton was an imposing, silver-haired man with sharp, cold gray eyes and a reputation for completely destroying anyone who dared to compromise his corporate name. I sat across from him, placed my laptop on the table, and laid out the complete, cloned digital evidence. The forged institutional guarantee waivers, the text messages proving criminal intent to defraud, and the tracking codes showing Julian routing stolen family cash through Pendleton's official corporate escrow account. Arthur Pendleton stared at the screen, his face turning an angry, white-hot crimson color as he realized his star sales agent was using his billionaire name to launder stolen money. The veins in his temples bulged with an apocalyptic fury. "This pathetic piece of garbage forged my personal corporate seal," Pendleton growled, his voice vibrating with immense authority. "He mixed criminal funds into my regulated corporate escrow. I will have my security team drag him out of his office in handcuffs this very afternoon." "No, Mr. Pendleton," I replied, my voice completely calm, devoid of any emotional warmth. "If you arrest him in his office today, his high-priced defense lawyers will instantly file for emergency corporate bail using your firm's liability insurance. He will notify his mistress, liquidate his accounts, and flee the country before the state can freeze his true assets. I do not want him stopped in a quiet office cubicle. I want the trap to close completely when he thinks he has won everything." The billionaire CEO leaned back in his leather chair, looking at me with a profound, freezing sense of professional respect. "What exactly are you proposing, Clara?" "Your firm is hosting its high-profile Elite Producers Diamond Gala on June 19th, I explained smoothly. "Every major investor, real estate developer, and media reporter in the state will be in that ballroom. Julian is planning to publicly announce his purchase of the Marina penthouse at that exact event to secure a promotion to executive partner. I want you to let him walk up to that microphone. I want you to keep your internal corporate audit completely dark until the exact second he takes the stage." Arthur Pendleton's sharp eyes locked onto mine, a dark, dangerous smile slowly forming on his elderly face. "You want a total corporate execution in front of his entire world. I absolutely love it. The firm's technical staff and media networks are completely at your disposal, Clara. Let's build the stage." With the billionaire CEO fully locked into my strategy, I took my next step. I needed to ensure that the seller of the penthouse, Apex Luxury Development Group, was completely locked down. I used my anonymous corporate consulting channel to leak a highly specialized, confidential piece of forensic data to their risk management team. I sent them an official, verified warning showing that the funds inside Julian's closing escrow were under active federal observation for grand larceny, and that any property title transferred utilizing those specific funds would be subject to immediate, absolute state forfeiture without a single dollar of compensation. Panicking at the prospect of losing their multi-million-dollar property, Apex Luxury immediately shifted the closing parameters, converting the escrow into a highly restricted dual-signature institutional account that required explicit, final CEO authorization from Arthur Pendleton himself before a single penny could be released or moved. Julian, completely arrogant and desperate to keep his dream alive before his flight to Paris, eagerly signed the contract amendment, completely unaware that he had just routed my stolen savings into a digital vault that was entirely controlled by his own boss. Meanwhile, I played my role at home with terrifying, absolute perfection. I cooked his favorite dinners every single night. I laughed at his arrogant, boastful stories about his wealthy clients. I even went to the luxury boutique with him to help him select a brand new white summer designer suit for the upcoming Diamond Gala. "You are going to look like the absolute king of the real estate world at this gala, Julian," I said smoothly, gently smoothing down the lapels of his $1,000 jacket as he admired himself in our bedroom mirror. He bought the suit using a credit line that he fully expected to completely abandon in a few weeks. "Image is absolute power in this city, Julian," I chuckled with total, unadulterated arrogance, adjusting his gold watch. "When people see you looking like a multi-millionaire, they hand you the keys to the kingdom. This Diamond Gala is going to be the launching pad for my entire new life." "Oh, I completely agree with you, Julian," I said, smiling softly at his reflection while my heart remained as cold as ice. "It is going to be an absolutely unforgettable evening." Structures built entirely on a foundation of lies carry a mathematical certainty. They are destined to collapse under the immense weight of their own corruption. Julian believed he was a master architect who had successfully executed the ultimate heist. But he was about to find out what happens when the architect steps inside the building right before the ceiling completely caves in. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet, intense preparation. Julian was completely energized, his narcissism acting like a heavy shield that blinded him to everything happening around him. He spent hours on the phone with Evelyn, coordinating their travel plans, completely unaware that every single digital packet of data leaving his smartphone was being captured, categorized, and filed away into a comprehensive federal fraud folder. I continued to handle our daily routine with calm, flawless execution. I kept my office locked during the day, telling Julian I was finishing a massive corporate rebrand for an international tech company that required absolute non-disclosure. He barely paid attention to my answers anyway, usually cutting me off to talk about his own upcoming triumph. "Once I am announced as a full equity partner at Pendleton, Clara, we are going to start operating in an entirely different social tier," he said over breakfast one morning, gesturing aggressively with his fork. "The small-scale residential brokers won't even be able to get a meeting with me. I'm building a real legacy here." "A legacy is a very important thing, Julian," I replied smoothly, setting down my coffee cup. "It's critical to have a strong foundation. Otherwise, everything can just slide away when you least expect it." He let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Slide away? I've locked down the marina property with Pendleton's personal institutional guarantee. That contract is concrete, Clara. It is completely untouchable." I smiled across the table at him, watching the sunlight catch the sharp edges of his expensive new watch. He truly believed he was the smartest man in any room he walked into. It never once occurred to him that the quiet designer who had supported his chaotic career for a decade was currently weaving a digital net around his entire future. On the morning of June 18th, 24 hours before the Grand Gala, I received a secure, encrypted email from Arthur Pendleton's private legal advisor. The document contained the final certified asset recovery injunction, fully signed by a federal judge. The injunction was kept under a strict emergency sealing order, meaning it would not appear on any public digital tracking database until exactly 3:00 p.m. the following afternoon. The legal machinery was completely in place. The trap was set, the triggers were wired, and the target was walking willingly straight toward the center of the stage. That evening, I watched Julian pack his high-end leather suitcases. He did it quietly, hiding the bags at the back of his closet, believing I was entirely occupied with my design work in the other room. He thought he was being incredibly clever, sneaking his clothes out of our home piece by piece so I wouldn't notice a sudden change before his morning flight to Paris. I sat in the dark living room after he fell asleep, looking at the silent house. 9 years of my life had been spent building a sanctuary with a man who was entirely willing to throw me into absolute financial ruin without a single moment of hesitation. The heartbreak had completely burned away, leaving nothing but the cold, pure diamond of absolute resolve. Tomorrow, the world would see him for exactly what he was. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Imperial Hotel was a magnificent display of opulent success. Over 600 of the state's elite real estate developers, commercial brokers, political figures, and media reporters were gathered for the Pendleton Real Estate International Elite Producers Diamond Gala. The entire room was enclosed in massive 30-foot walls of polished crystal and gold trim that overlooked a stunning city skyline, lit brilliantly by hundreds of magnificent chandeliers. Julian was floating through the wealthy crowd like a movie star. His white designer suit was pristine, a crystal glass of expensive champagne resting casually in his manicured hand. He was surrounded by a circle of wealthy investors and junior associates, laughing loudly, his chest puffed out with the unadulterated arrogance of a man who believed he had successfully pulled off the ultimate heist against his own family. I walked quietly beside him, wearing a simple, understated dark navy dress that I had owned for years. I kept my posture modest, my eyes slightly downcast, perfectly projecting the exact image Julian wanted the world to see. The quiet, ordinary, supportive housewife who was merely background decoration for his brilliant, high-flying career. Every time a senior executive complimented him on his recent high-volume sales pipeline, Julian would pat my shoulder with a heavy, deeply patronizing condescension. Yes, Clara does a wonderful job holding down the fort at home. It takes a lot of quiet stability behind the scenes to allow a developer like me to operate at this level of creative intensity. I'm truly blessed. The sheer, sickening audacity of his words was enough to make a weaker person scream. But I simply nodded, smiled politely at the executives, and checked the digital clock on my wrist. It was exactly 2:45 p.m. The main presentations were about to begin. At the central VIP table sat Arthur Pendleton himself, surrounded by his elite corporate board members. The billionaire CEO looked at Julian with an expression of total, unreadable, stone-cold calm. Julian turned and flashed his signature, confident smile toward his boss, completely believing that his grand promotion was about to be officially signed into reality. And then, across the crowded ballroom, standing near the massive crystal water display, I spotted her. Evelyn Rose. She was dressed in a stunning, highly conspicuous, backless emerald green silk gown that seemed designed to draw every single eye in the room. She was surrounded by her high-fashion entourage, but her eyes kept darting across the pavilion, locking onto Julian with a hidden, triumphant smirk of shared deception. They didn't speak openly. They were far too clever to trigger any immediate office gossip. But the tension between them was palpable. Their first-class flights to Paris were booked for exactly 10 o'clock the next morning. Their luxury suitcases were already packed and sitting in the trunk of Julian's sports car in the VIP parking lot. At exactly 2:55 p.m., the master of ceremonies stepped up to the crystal podium, his voice booming loudly through the premium surround sound speaker system. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are about to begin our keynote address and presentation of our annual Elite Volume Awards. To kick off the afternoon, please welcome our Senior Director of Private Sales, Julian Vance. The entire room erupted into thundering applause. Julian turned to me, giving me a smug, victorious grin that reached all the way to his eyes. Watch closely, Clara. This is the exact moment my new life becomes real. Oh, I am watching very closely, Julian, I whispered back, looking directly into his eyes with a terrifying, absolute calm that he was far too narcissistic to recognize. Don't miss a single second. As Julian walked proudly up the steps to the stage, the main lights in the pavilion dimmed for the traditional high-definition digital video presentation that showcases the firm's top-performing properties. A massive 30-foot projection screen lowered slowly from the steel rafters behind the center stage podium. Julian stood confidently at the microphone, basking in the bright glare of the spotlight, his hands resting easily on the polished glass edges of the lectern. "Thank you, everyone," Julian began, his voice resonant, smooth, and deeply practiced. "In high-end real estate, we don't just sell physical spaces. We sell an image of absolute success. We build legacies that are designed to stand the test of time, structures that provide absolute security, absolute power. When you handle a premium asset, you must operate with total confidence, total control." While his beautiful, empty words echoed through the silent ballroom, I quietly reached into my small evening clutch. I pulled out my secure mobile terminal. The digital clock on my screen read exactly 2:59:55 p.m. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I pressed the central decryption execution key. On the massive 30-foot screen behind Julian, the beautiful promotional video of luxury portfolios and commercial skyscrapers suddenly flickered. The screen went completely black for a half-second, cutting his audio presentation short. The crowd began to murmur in confusion. Julian stopped speaking, a slight, irritated frown creasing his handsome forehead as he turned his head to look over his shoulder at the technical staff. "It seems our media team has a minor digital formatting issue with the presentation file." But it wasn't a formatting issue. The massive screen flashed back to life with blinding brightness. But it wasn't showing investment charts. It was showing a highly detailed, certified, deep-level forensic corporate audit document. And at the very top of the screen, printed in massive, bold red letters that could be read clearly by every single person in the 600-seat ballroom, were the words, "Pendleton International, Internal Audit Dossier, number 8821. Target, Julian Vance. Systemic 401k, larceny, and corporate forgery." The silence that slammed into the grand ballroom was absolute, terrifying, and heavy, like the sudden dropping of an iron curtain. The words died completely in Julian's throat. He stared at the massive screen behind him, every single drop of color draining from his face within seconds, leaving him a ghastly, ash-white color that looked horrific under the intense glare of the stage spotlight. The automated forensic script I had loaded into the hotel's media network began to cycle through the evidence slides at a steady, cold, unyielding pace. The next slide populated a massive, high-resolution side-by-side comparison. On the left side was the original legal deed of my private 401k account. On the right side was the fraudulent trust modification Julian had executed in secret, with a massive, high-contrast digital magnification of my forged electronic signature, overlaying an official handwriting analysis report that read, 100% forgery, transfers illegal. A collective, unified gasp of absolute horror rippled through the crowd of 600 professionals. These were the state's top developers, corporate lawyers, and wealth managers. They didn't need a summary or an explanation. They knew exactly what they were looking at. They were witnessing the public dissection of a brazen, heartless felony. "What? What is this? This is a joke! Turn it off!" Julian shrieked into the microphone, his voice cracking hysterically, a sharp, deafening feedback screeching through the sound system. He turned frantically toward the tech booth at the back of the room, waving his arms wildly. "Cut the power! Kill the screen right now!" But the tech booth was entirely out of his control. 2 corporate security officers were standing inside the locked booth, ensuring the stream ran its full, uninterrupted course under Arthur Pendleton's explicit orders. The slides continued to cycle, faster now, driving the final stakes into his career with absolute mathematical precision. The screen flashed a massive image of the modern marina penthouse, followed immediately by the private text message logs between Julian and Evelyn Rose. One specific text message Julian had sent her was magnified to take up the entire 30-foot screen. "She's just a quiet designer. She never checks her financial portals. The moment the cash clears the escrow fund in June, the penthouse is ours. We will board our flight to Paris before she even realizes her savings are completely gone down to zero." The entire ballroom turned as a single, massive unit to look at Evelyn. Her smug smile didn't just vanish. her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. In her desperation to escape the burning glare of 600 people, she stumbled backward, her heels catching on the hem of her emerald green gown. She crashed heavily into a luxury banquet table, knocking a massive crystal vase of dark water and ice straight into her lap, the liquid soaking her dress like a physical stain. She scrambled to her feet, trying to flee toward the western exit doors, but as she reached the heavy handles, the doors were pushed open from the outside. 4 state law enforcement officers, accompanied by corporate fraud investigators, stepped firmly into the ballroom. Julian was shaking so violently on stage that he had to grip the edges of the glass lectern to keep from collapsing. He tried to step away from the microphone, to run down the back stairs of the stage, but Arthur Pendleton stood up from the central VIP table. The billionaire CEO's face was completely set in a look of apocalyptic, white-hot fury. "Julian!" Pendleton's voice boomed across the silent ballroom like a thunderclap, completely unamplified by a microphone, yet vibrating with immense power. "Look at the screen right now, you miserable little thief!" The final slide had just populated. It was the commercial wealth indemnity waiver carrying Arthur Pendleton's forged digital corporate seal, alongside the tracking data showing Julian routing stolen family cash through the firm's official corporate escrow account. Pendleton looked at his star sales agent with a look of absolute, deep-seated disgust. "You forged my personal corporate seal? You used my firm, my name, my 40 years of clean work to launder a stolen fortune from your own wife? You are completely finished, Julian. I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your natural life in a cage." "Arthur, please, it's a conspiracy. My wife is insane. She manipulated the servers. She's framing me." Julian screamed hysterically, his voice cracking as he pointed a sweating, shaking finger directly at me as I sat calmly at my table, elegantly sipping my water. The lead fraud investigator walked straight up the stage steps, his boots echoing loudly on the wooden floor. He didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He grabbed Julian's right arm, twisting it firmly behind his back, the sharp, heavy metallic snap of handcuffs clicking across the ballroom microphone for everyone to hear. "Julian Vance, you are under arrest for grand larceny, identity theft, commercial fraud, and escrow manipulation," the investigator stated coldly, his voice broadcasting with crystal clarity to the entire silent crowd. Julian didn't look like a high-flying real estate director anymore. He didn't look like a millionaire executive. As they dragged him down the stage steps, his expensive white designer suit wrinkling and twisting uncomfortably around his slumped shoulders, he caught sight of me. He stopped struggling against the officer's heavy grip, his eyes wild, wide with a mixture of absolute terror and deep, burning hatred. "You did this!" he shrieked like a wild animal, his face twisting into a grotesque mask of fury. "You planned this whole thing. You completely destroyed my entire life." I stood up slowly from my seat. For the very first time that afternoon, I looked directly into his eyes, letting the full, freezing weight of my authority wash over his soul. I walked calmly across the floor, stopping just inches away from his sweaty, terrified face. "I didn't build this trap, Julian. Your own greed designed every single contract," I said, my voice a quiet, lethal whisper that carried only to him. "You forgot that you married a designer. You thought you could sell my life's work out from under my feet, but I simply audited the foundation, and I watched your whole world cave in." As the officers dragged a weeping, broken Julian and a hysterical Evelyn out through the grand ballroom doors in front of dozens of flashing cameras from the local press, I felt a massive, invisible pressure lift entirely from my chest. The structure of lies had collapsed, leaving nothing but the clean, bright light of absolute, unyielding justice. The aftermath of a major white-collar arrest is surprisingly quiet. Once the flashing lights of the police cruisers left the hotel driveway and the wealthy attendees dispersed into the city night, whispering furiously about the historic scandal they had just witnessed, the true structural rebuilding began. Because Julian had utilized a completely forged digital signature and an unauthorized corporate seal to execute the high-volume fund transfer, the State Asset Protection Unit immediately declared the entire ownership modification on my 401k account null, void, and legally non-existent from its inception. The $380,000 that had been locked inside the restricted escrow vault at Pendleton Real Estate International was officially detached from the penthouse title. Within 72 hours, a federal asset recovery officer oversaw the direct manual restoration of every single dollar straight back into my private retirement fund. Julian's name was completely expunged from the real estate firm's corporate ledgers before sunrise the next morning. Arthur Pendleton's high-priced legal team immediately initiated a total liquidation of Julian's past performance bonds and deferred commissions, using the capital to cover the immense costs of the internal forensic investigation and completely protect the company's public brand. 3 months later, I stood in the quiet, sterile hallway of the federal courthouse. The air was cool, carrying none of the tense, toxic pressure that had suffocated my life for the past year. Inside the courtroom, Julian stood before a senior federal judge. The expensive white designer suit was gone, replaced by a bright orange standard-issue state jumpsuit that hung loosely off his gaunt, diminished frame. His signature confident posture was entirely broken. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the polished wood of the floor, his shoulders hunched forward in deep, permanent defeat. The judge looked down from her high bench with an expression of complete, unyielding severity. Julian Vance, you have demonstrated a profound, clinical lack of basic human integrity, the judge stated, her voice echoing sharply off the stone walls. To systematically strip away your spouse's retirement security, the physical manifestation of a decade of her independent labor, and to actively forge the institutional identity of your employer simply to fund a temporary life of extreme vanity is a crime of absolute malice. This court will ensure the community is completely protected from your predatory behavior. She sentenced him to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, with absolutely zero possibility of early parole or structural mitigation. Evelyn Rose was sentenced to an absolute 18-month term for corporate conspiracy and knowingly attempting to receive stolen assets. As the bailiff stepped forward to guide Julian through the heavy iron doors at the side of the courtroom, he turned his head slightly, his eyes wide with an absolute weeping desperation, catching my gaze through the crowd. He silently mouthed a single, pathetic word. Please. I didn't answer. I didn't feel a single wave of hot anger, nor did I feel a single drop of personal pity. I simply picked up my leather designer briefcase, turned my back on his orange jumpsuit, and walked out of the building into the clean, beautiful afternoon air. True security is never found in the things that can be easily stolen, forged, or transferred away by a clever liar in the dark. It is not found in a luxury glass penthouse overlooking a marina, an expensive gold watch, or a white designer suit meant to impress a room full of strangers. This grueling, painful journey taught me that the only structures that truly endure are the ones built on absolute honesty, personal discipline, and real human integrity. I returned to my suburban home that evening. The house was quiet, peaceful, and completely clear of the heavy shadow of deception that had occupied its rooms for over 14 months. I sat at my office desk, looking at the glowing monitors of my design terminal. My 401k fund was completely secure, my small creative studio was thriving, and my life was entirely my own again. Julian believed he was a master operator who could treat my life savings like his personal goldmine. He thought that because I was a quiet, supportive partner, I would never have the strength to look beneath his beautiful facade. But he completely miscalculated the absolute power of a woman who knows exactly how to read a layout, trace a line, and follow the data to its absolute source. As you look at your own life and the people you surround yourself with, always remember to look past the charming smiles and the grand, magnificent promises of a castle in the sky. True wealth is the peace of mind that comes from knowing your foundation is concrete, your actions are clean, and your independence is entirely untouchable. Lies and greed carry a mathematical certainty. They are destined to collapse under the heavy weight of their own corruption every single time. And when the smoke finally clears, the people who operated with true loyalty, silent strength, and fierce devotion will always be the ones left standing, completely safe in a world that no predator can ever destroy.